What if you woke up tomorrow and everything you rely on to stay warm just vanished? No heating, no thick blankets, no hot food delivered to your door. Just you and the brutal cold pressing in from every direction. For most of us, that sounds like a nightmare. But for our ancient ancestors, that was simply life. Not for a day, not for a season, but for hundreds of thousands of years. We're talking about a world stretching back 300,000 years, a time when anatomically modern Homo sapiens and their cousins, the Neanderthals, faced Ice Age conditions that would stop most of us dead in our tracks. During the last glacial maximum, around 20,000 years ago, global temperatures averaged 6 degrees Celsius colder than today. That gap was enough to bury a city like London under a full kilometer of solid ice. And yet, they survived. Generation after generation, in some of the harshest conditions Earth has ever seen. So the real question is, how exactly did they do it? If this is already blowing your mind, hit that like button and subscribe. There's so much more coming. And drop a comment below. Do you think you could survive even 1 week in those conditions? Let's find out together. Everyone knows ancient humans used fire. That part isn't surprising, but here's what most people completely miss. By the time the Ice Age hit its most brutal peak, fire wasn't some exciting new discovery. It was already ancient technology. Evidence from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa shows controlled fire use going back nearly 1 million years. These people didn't stumble onto warmth by accident. They had mastered it across thousands of generations. And that's exactly what makes it so fascinating. Because fire wasn't just a heat source, it was an entire survival system running multiple critical functions at once. Evolutionary biologist Richard Wrangham made a compelling argument that cooking food over fire is literally what allowed the human brain to grow as large as it did. Cooked food delivers significantly more usable energy than raw food, and that extra energy went straight to fueling a bigger, more complex brain. Fire didn't just keep our ancestors warm, it made them smarter. Think about that for a second. But the role of fire went even further than that. In an Ice Age landscape, nights were shared with cave lions weighing up to 300 kilograms, animals that had absolutely no reason to fear a lone human being. A roaring fire changed that dynamic completely. Predators back off from flames. You sleep, you survive. On top of that, winters brought up to 16 hours of total darkness, and fire was the only light keeping social life, storytelling, and knowledge transfer alive through those long, frozen nights. There's one detail, though, that tends to get completely overlooked, and it might be the most powerful of all. In those conditions, wet clothing wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a fast track to hypothermia and death. Fire dried the clothes. Fire literally kept people alive in ways we rarely stop to appreciate. And the person responsible for maintaining that fire, not the strongest hunter, not the fiercest warrior, may have been the single most valuable member of the entire group. Now, if you picture ancient humans huddled in a dark cave, barely surviving the night, you're only seeing part of the story. Yes, caves were used, and they were genuinely excellent natural shelters. A deep cave maintains a remarkably stable internal temperature year-round, typically between 10 and 13 degrees Celsius, no matter how savage the conditions outside. That's not warm by any modern standard, but combined with fire and shared body heat, it was absolutely survivable. In the middle of an Ice Age winter, that consistency was everything. And here's what really changes the picture. The interior of these caves wasn't random or chaotic. Archaeological evidence shows sophisticated, deliberate organization. Fire pits were positioned strategically to maximize heat distribution throughout the space. There were clearly designated areas for sleeping, separate zones for tool-making, and specific spots for food preparation. This wasn't an animal taking shelter in a hole. This was planned, intentional use of space. This was prehistoric interior design built entirely around survival. But caves weren't always available. Resources moved, animals migrated, and people followed. So, when there was no cave, they built. And what they built is one of the most extraordinary things in all of human prehistory. At a site called Masaryk in modern-day Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered circular structures constructed almost entirely from mammoth bones and tusks, dating back roughly 15,000 years. Femurs, shoulder blades, jawbones, vertebrae, carefully interlocked and stacked to form walls, then covered with animal hides stretched tightly across the frame. Some of these structures required remains from over 150 individual mammoths. Let that number sink in. This wasn't improvised emergency shelter thrown together in a desperate moment. This was deliberate, large-scale prehistoric architecture sourcing specific bones for specific structural purposes, transporting them to a chosen site, and assembling them with collective knowledge and precision that genuinely staggers the imagination. Modern culture is obsessed with the lone survivor, the solitary figure who conquers nature through sheer individual will. It makes for a great story, but for Ice Age humans, going it alone wasn't heroic. It was a death sentence. The single most powerful survival technology they had wasn't fire, wasn't shelter, wasn't even clothing. It was each other. Community wasn't a comfort, it was infrastructure, and they understood that at a level we've almost completely lost touch with. These groups typically ranged from 20 to 50 people living and moving together, but the social network extended far beyond that, through trade, intermarriage, and seasonal gatherings. Individuals were connected to networks of hundreds, sometimes thousands of people spread across vast frozen territories. That web of relationships meant access to resources, knowledge, and backup when things went wrong. And in an Ice Age winter, things going wrong wasn't a possibility. It was a certainty. What made these communities so resilient was specialization. When the margin for error is zero, you cannot afford generalists doing everything poorly. You need the person who knows exactly how to process every single calorie out of a hunted animal. Bones, marrow, organs, nothing wasted. You need the one who knows which roots still hide beneath 2 feet of snow and exactly where to dig. You need the elder who remembers the brutal winter 3 decades ago and what the group did to survive it. Every single role carried life or death weight. And those stories told around the fire at night, those weren't entertainment. They were survival manuals passed from one generation to the next through the only medium available, human memory and human voice. The old woman who knew every edible plant within 100 kilometers wasn't a burden to the group. She was a living library. Lose her and you lose knowledge that took lifetimes to build. Here's something that puts everything into perspective. Humans are, biologically speaking, naked primates. No fur, no thick skin, no natural insulation. Strip away the clothing and expose a modern human to Ice Age conditions, and hypothermia sets in within hours. Death follows shortly after. Clothing wasn't a cultural choice for these people. It was the line between being alive and not. And the evidence suggests they figured this out extraordinarily early. Genetic analysis of body lice diverging from head lice points to clothing use going back at least 170,000 years. This solution is ancient beyond imagination. But the sophistication of what they built is what truly stops you in your tracks. At a burial site in Sungir, Russia, dating back 34,000 years, archaeologists found 2 children interred with thousands of handcrafted ivory beads sewn directly into their garments. The pattern of those beads reveals something remarkable, a deliberate 3-layer clothing system. A thin inner layer against the skin, a thick insulating middle layer to trap body heat, and a tough outer layer to block wind and moisture. That is the exact same layering system recommended by modern mountain survival guides today. They arrived at the same solution independently, without any of our science. And the tools they used to construct these garments are equally staggering. Bone needles have been recovered with eye holes measuring just 1 millimeter across, 1 millimeter carved by hand in firelight tens of thousands of years ago. These weren't crude instruments. They were precision tools enabling tight, weatherproof stitching that genuinely kept people alive through temperatures that would kill an unprotected human in a matter of hours. Food followed the same logic of ruthless efficiency. In extreme cold, the human metabolism can spike by up to 50%. The body burns through calories at a terrifying rate, just to maintain core temperature. Fat wasn't just preferred, it was the supreme nutritional currency of the Pleistocene. A single adult mammoth could yield up to 500,000 calories. Hunts were collective operations, driving herds into swamps, setting ambushes, using fire and coordinated noise to control movement. What they couldn't eat immediately was stored in the permafrost, acting as a natural freezer, or preserved as dried meat and pemmican, a dense mixture of fat and protein that functioned as the original energy bar. And every autumn, the entire community shifted into a state of urgent, calculated preparation, stockpiling for the worst winter imaginable, because underestimating it even once could mean not seeing spring. There's an image that gets attached to prehistoric humans almost automatically wandering figures, drifting across frozen landscapes with no real direction, surviving more by luck than by design. That picture is wrong, completely wrong. The movement of Ice Age people across those vast territories wasn't random drift. It was calculated, seasonal, and built on accumulated knowledge so precise it rivals what we'd call strategic planning today. These weren't wanderers. They were navigators operating without maps because the map was inside their heads. Their migrations followed the animals, reindeer, bison, salmon, running a priver at predictable times of year, and that word predictable is everything. Knowing when and where the herds would move wasn't guesswork. It was the product of generations of careful observation, passed down through exactly those fireside stories we talked about earlier. The group didn't chase animals blindly. They positioned themselves ahead of the movement, waiting at the right location at the right moment, because someone in that group had inherited the knowledge of where the herd would be before the herd even arrived. Winter destinations weren't random either. River valleys were chosen with clear strategic logic, natural windbreaks carved into the landscape, guaranteed access to liquid water even in deep freeze, and consistent convergence points for the animals they depended on. And here's the archaeological proof that these routes were real and deliberate. Stone tools crafted from specific rock types have been recovered hundreds of kilometers from the only geological source of that stone. That's not coincidence. That's evidence of established routes, repeated journeys, and planned returns to the same locations across years and decades. What this tells us is something profound about the kind of intelligence operating inside these people. They held detailed mental models of landscapes spanning hundreds of kilometers, seasonal patterns, journey durations, water sources, danger zones, shelter locations. Every move was a decision informed by deep generational knowledge. And that knowledge, invisible and unwritten, was just as sophisticated as anything we'd find impressive today. Fire, shelter, clothing, food, strategic migration, every single thing we've covered in this story traces back to one source, one capability that no other animal possesses at the same level: the human mind. Specifically, the ability to imagine a problem before it arrives and construct a solution in advance. A bear doesn't decide to store fat for winter, its body does it automatically through instinct. An ancient human looked at the coming cold, reasoned through what it would demand, communicated that reasoning to the group in complex language, and then organized collective action around a shared plan. That gap between instinct and conscious anticipation is the entire distance between extinction and survival. And the evidence of that mind is written on cave walls across Europe. The paintings of Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira are commonly described as art, and they are breathtaking. But reducing them to art misses what they actually were. These were visual databases, detailed records of animal species, migration behaviors, seasonal patterns, physical characteristics, maintained across generations, updated with new observations, consulted by hunters preparing for what was coming. This was information storage built into the walls of their world because the stakes of forgetting were too high to risk. But physical survival was only half the challenge. Months of confinement, dwindling food stores, total darkness, and unrelenting cold created enormous psychological pressure. A group fractured by fear, conflict, or despair didn't survive, not because they lacked resources, but because they stopped functioning as a unit. Ice Age communities understood this. Bone flutes dating back 40,000 years tell us that music existed. Rituals and collective ceremonies weren't spiritual indulgences, they were deliberate psychological maintenance, engineered to hold the group together when everything outside was trying to pull it apart. A group that keeps its morale intact survives. A group that fragments doesn't. These people weren't passively enduring the Ice Age winter, they were actively managing it. With a collective intelligence we have consistently and dramatically underestimated. And when you understand the full picture of what they built and how they thought, it raises a question that's genuinely hard to shake off. Every time you adjust your thermostat, walk into a supermarket, or pull on a waterproof jacket before stepping into the cold, you are living inside the legacy of these people. Every piece of modern survival technology is a direct descendant of solutions they figured out under impossible conditions, with nothing but their minds, their hands, and each other. That's not a metaphor. That's your actual inheritance from 170,000 years of human ingenuity. If this story moved something in you, if you made it all the way here and felt that connection to who we really are, then this channel was made for you. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell because we go deep into human history and survival intelligence every single week. Comment Survivor below if this video changed the way you see our ancestors. That one word tells me everything. And if you want to keep going, the next video is already on your screen. Don't let it wait.